Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Keith Fleming. This is the Daily Fix podcast on the Fantasy and Frames Podcast Network. With me, as always, my brother from yet another mother, Joseph the Brain Matz. What's going on, Joe?
I like how you make it sound like there's a lot of mothers that we could theoretically share.
A lot, a lot of slutting
I'm,
going around, Joe, back in the 80s.
I'm just trying to still emotionally deal with a tie in one of the Giants' biggest games of the year. So that's
Better than a loss.
It was better than a loss.
I think it's going to come back to help you and Washington potentially both make the playoffs.
Well,
I really think it could be huge.
It could be. I think we have to beat them in 2 weeks, barring the unexpected this week. As we'll see with my picks, I am not expecting the Giants to fare well against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Well, we are back. There's no guest this week. We're sorry. We appreciate again Joe Pepe jumping on last week with us. Excited to announce, and I don't know if we've said this yet. We go through the playoffs, so I know the regular season and the fantasy seasons are winding down. You can't get rid of us that easy. We'll be with you wild card, divisional, conference championship weekend, also for the Super Bowl. Really excited to announce that Chris Robin is going to come back. Joe Pepe is going to come back. I think Justin's going to come back. And then I think for the Super Bowl, we're going to do an all frames edition where I'm going to try to get some of the guys from Fantasy and Frames to come on.
Awesome.
But we will continue to do DFS through. And we continue to give optimal lineups. 28 plays last week, 200 points yet again. That's 4 out of 5 weeks. It's really, I don't know. Nobody likes tooting their own horn, but it's been impressive, Joe. At least we know that Jorge and the rest of the Fantasy and Frames guys aren't like these idiots.
Yeah, right. The new guys are real dumb.
Exactly. So that's good. We'll get right into it again. And just if you are new here, we appreciate you. Thanks for joining us. But every week, expensive, median, and bargain tier plays at each position. We try to help you build the best possible lineup that you can. Because again, we know people listening to this, you play DFS, you know what you're doing. We're just trying to give you some information and guys that'll help you build your lineup. So we always start with the QBs, the expensive tier. I'm going with Joseph Burrow, 7,000 versus Cleveland. He's averaging 26 points per game over his last 3 starts. That's second among QBs over the last 3 games. 27 points per game his last 7. Boy, the struggles of the Bengals offense early in the season are long gone. 30 or more points in 4 of his last 7. He's playing a Cleveland D that held him to by far his fewest points scored on the season, 15.48. That was at the end of October. But just a reminder, Cleveland is not a juggernaut on defense. I say this every time I like a quarterback versus Cleveland. The immortal Joe Flacco and Billy Zappa in those 2 games combined for over 600 yards and 6 touchdowns with no picks. Most importantly, Jamar Chase, who was pretty important in this offense, he will be back. He was last week as well, but the Cleveland game, the first one, was the first game that Chase had missed. Obviously, that threw a wrench in the Bengals offense. When you're missing one of the most explosive players in football, that can play a factor. And I think this Bengals offense is really rolling and got it back. Burrow last week versus the Chiefs, it was one of the most impressive non-300-yard performances I've ever seen. He just kept moving the ball. They've been so good in the red zone. Going into last week, they had scored a touchdown on 17 consecutive trips into the red zone, minus kneeling at the end of games. And then if you need any more reason to like Burrow, he has now ran for 30 yards or more and or scored a touchdown, rushing one that is, in 3 of his last 4. So he's had 74 yards rushing the last 2 games. So I just think Burrow is as safe as it gets, and they're being a little disrespectful with that 7,000 price. I'll line it up all day. Give me Burrow in a revenge game versus Cleveland.
I like that one a lot. People may remember, I'm sure if you're remotely a fan of any of the AFC North teams, that Joe Burrow has never beaten the Cleveland Browns. But on average, he's thrown for over 300 yards in those games and multiple scores. So even if that continues, and I will be very surprised if it does, That's no reason to fade Burrow. I love that pick. I went a little pricier in part because I was kind of leaning Burrow, and I saw you took him, and I was like, all right,
Always good to splurge, right, Joe?
Yeah, I was like, you know what? There was one other QB I really liked, and the only reason I liked Burrow more was the price difference because I love Jalen Hurts this week, 8,100 against my Giants. Again, you look at the fantasy points per game on DraftKings, Hurts is 0.2 points below Josh Allen. So he is right up there with literally anybody. Coming off an incredible game last week against Tennessee, and really just a string of games. He has back-to-back 30-point games, 6 straight games with over 20 points. He in this offense, I mean, like you said with the Bengals, they're rolling. The Eagles are rolling just as hard. And they're rolling into a team that is not trending in the right direction with my Giants, in part because of injuries. We are without our top corner, Adoree Jackson, as I tend to mention every week when I keep picking receivers against us. Xavier McKinney, our top safety, he hurt himself during our bye week a month ago in an ATV accident. So that's great. So, yeah, when you're down your 2 best DBs and then A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith are coming to town, and you throw in that Jalen Hurts is always a threat to run for 60 yards and a touchdown, I don't see a reason to go away. Again, the Giants, the fantasy points per game against, they look good. It's like, oh, they're 10th. This is a good defense. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors. This is not a good defense. When you go by DVOA, which adjusts then for the quality of your opponents, this is the 28th defense against the pass. Yeah, the only question is if you want to save some money and go Joe Burrow, because Jalen Hurts is guaranteed to give you 20 plus, and there's a reasonable chance it's a third straight 30-point game.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Hurts, still a cheat code. He's not quite the cheat code he was a couple of years ago, but I mean, when a guy can rush for what was it, 154 yards or something ridiculous just a couple of weeks ago, that shows what his ceiling is.
Yeah, he's kind of he's very similar to what Lamar Jackson was doing his MVP season.
So I love that median tier, and I actually went cheaper because I think there's a lot of great plays under 6K this week, like a lot.
The median tier is one of the hardest choices. Yeah.
It was. Yeah, it was loaded. 5,600 versus Minnesota. He's thrown multiple touchdowns in 3 of his last 5, including his last 2. The Vikings have slowly become the passing version of the Texans' run defense. One of my favorite sayings, Joe, just a treasure trove to opposing QBs. I mean, they eat. Since week 6, over their last 7 games, 5 of the 7 opposing QBs have finished top 7 for the week on DraftKings. And you might say, well, maybe they just ran into a tough slate of QBs. In that span, they've played Teddy Bridgewater, Mac Jones, Mike White, all who scored 22 points or more. Quarterbacks are averaging in that span 23.2 points per game. And I just want to go through it really quickly because it's that ridiculous. Week 6, Teddy Bridgewater, 23.16 points. Week 8, Kyler Murray, 29.64 points. Taylor Heineke, week 9, 14.66 points. That was the lowest the QB finished against them on DraftKings. That was 13th. Week 10, Josh Allen, 25.60 points. Dak in week 11, 20.64 points. Mac Jones in week 12, 26.28 points. And then Mike White last week with 22.46 points. And let's be honest, this Lions offense is frisky all of a sudden. Like St. Brown is doing St. Brown things. We'll definitely talk about him later. DeAndre Swift appears to be back in this offense and doing DeAndre Swift things. They got Jamal Williams, who's more of a bruiser. DJ Shark is back, who also I will talk about later on this podcast. And then the wild card's Jameson Williams, who is playing a very small role first week, but he will be unleashed. And if they unleash him just a little bit versus this secondary, goodness gracious, it could get ugly. I love Jared Goff this week at 5,600. It's arguably my favorite QB play this week and one of my favorite plays, period.
Yeah, I was looking long and hard at Jared Goff. Now, another thing with him is the home road splits are pretty severe.
Right.
I believe he's averaging 20 plus at home and like under 10 on the road, especially he's been bad outside of domes. This is a home game, and obviously it's in a dome. I actually kind of think the Lions win this game. So
I do
yeah,
too.
I love that
That's
play.
scary. They're favored. How nuts is that? -2.5.
Again, when you go again by Football Outsiders DVOA, the Vikings are like the same quality as the Giants, and the Giants have already had their like come back to reality moment over the last month. And at some point, I mean, it did hit against the Cowboys for Minnesota, but it's going to hit again. And I think it's this week. So I love that play. Once again, I'm going a little more expensive. I considered Kirk Cousins, but then I was like, well, I'm also picking the Lions to win that game. And who knows with Kirk, but
And who wants to
I
pull
like,
for Kirk Cousins?
not me. I'd much
Not
rather
me.
pull for a guy I've consistently been a fan of this season. That's Geno Smith, 6,200 against Carolina. Again, another guy super consistent, 6 straight games with at least 2 passing touchdowns, broke 200 yards in all of them. Back-to-back weeks over 300 yards, giving us that bonus. And the thing I like about it, too, is, you worry about the Carolina matchup. Does this become a run-heavy game, blah, blah, blah. Well, all their running backs got hurt last week. Kenneth Walker.
Literally all of them.
Yeah. They're on like the 4th string guy. So Kenneth Walker he has not practiced so far. He's the 1st string, obviously. DJ Dallas is 2nd string. He has not practiced this week. Both those guys look unlikely to suit up. That leads me to believe this team's going to lean heavier in the passing game than they normally would. Even if they get a lead, just because I think they're going to trust the way that Geno has played this season, that he can do that. I read like 3 different things that were talking about like wide receiver versus corners, like broadly as the teams matching up. And like every single one was like, look out, Seattle against Carolina, that's a massacre. And I was like, great. So Geno Smith. So I'm loving this matchup just because, again, the consistency is there. And Geno's also a guy where, even if he doesn't throw it 35 times, which again, I think there's a reasonable chance he does, he's top 5 in yards per attempt this season. So you get Tyler Lockett, you get DK Metcalf. It doesn't always take a lot of passes, but I think he's going to get both in this. So I'm loving Geno.
Yeah, I mean, Geno is a friend of the pod at this point. We both love
He
Geno.
100% is.
Have been on him all year. My bargain, who I went on the TSS Fantasy pod waiver debate again this week. He was my waiver wire ad at QB. I think he's a great play this week, and potentially if Lamar misses more games, until basically he's not the starter, and that's Tyler Huntley, 5,500 at Pittsburgh. He scored double figures in 5 of his last 6 starts, or at least games that he's played 80% of the snaps or more, dating back to last year, averaging just under 17 points per game in those. Most importantly, and we love this in non-elite quarterbacks, right, Joe? He's rushed for at least 40 yards in every one of those games, which, what do we always talk about?
We do like
that gives him a really high floor, which when you are, again, not talking about elite QB or you're spending in this range on, DraftKings, that's 4 points that you can count on right then and there, no matter what. And he's had some games where he's had 70, 80 yards rushing. So that's just the floor for the rushing. The 16.6 points he scored last week and, spelling Lamar Jackson versus the Broncos, a reminder, the Broncos are 2nd in football for fantasy purposes against QBs, one of the better defenses. So 16.6 versus that Broncos D is impressive, especially when he didn't take first-team snaps all week. And then the Steelers, I know that their numbers are starting to look a little better, but when you play Marcus Mariota and the Falcons, you'll look better against the pass. They're 25th on DraftKings in points per games allowed to QBs, and they've given up 17 passing touchdowns in their last 8 games. And then there's a guy that I'm going to talk about on the tight ends that is my favorite selection of all, and this is why I really love Tyler Huntley. For whatever reason, he unleashes Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews, and I'll get into the numbers when I talk to him at the tight end, but he is so much more effective, especially for fantasy purposes, with Tyler Huntley at quarterback. So when you're telling me I have a quarterback that runs, who can unleash their best weapon in the passing game, and they're playing a Steelers D that, I'm sorry, it's like there's been signs of life, but the Watt return has not done what I thought it would. You can throw on them for sure. I love Huntley this week. And I love pairing them with Andrews. That's a great stack for, I think it's like 12,200.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm co-signing this one. He is also my bargain tier guy. I was tempted by a couple other guys. I mean, I looked at Ryan Tannehill is very cheap. He's down at 5,200. The Jags.
Our boy Mike White.
Yeah, our boy Mike White. Although I'm a little more wary of that one because it's Buffalo, whereas Ryan Tannehill gets the Jacksonville Jaguars, who again are falling apart on defense, as they proved again last week against Detroit. But I just thought about Tannehill. I was like, if they get the lead, then they're just pounding it with Derrick Henry. Like, I think the floor, that was the thing. I was like, is the floor higher than Huntley? Maybe. But like you said, Huntley runs. And then, like, the odds of a 25-point game that really springs us is just so much higher with Huntley than it is, like, a Tannehill. So I'm with you. There's obviously risk. His game against Pittsburgh last year was not great. But like you said, the Pittsburgh defense last year was playing at a much higher level than this one is. And yeah, when you know, based off of last season, the Huntley Andrews that play is what you want to lock in if you're playing him, I think that just makes it that much more enticing because you don't have those doubts of like, what if it's Duvernay? It's like, no, it's going to be Mark Andrews if Tyler Huntley goes off.
Absolutely. And just a reminder, Huntley did have a 34-point game last year versus Green Bay in Week 15. So that's the kind of ceiling that he has as well, right? Yeah, for a guy that's in the 5,500 range, I'll take it. All right, moving on to the running backs. Stop me if you've heard this before, Joe, but I'm taking with my expensive tier running back a guy that's facing the Houston Texans. Give me Tony Pollard, 6,700 versus the Texans, my favorite team to pick on. I was really close to taking Zeke because he's $600 cheaper. And again, it's the Texans who are just dreadful. They've had 6 backs that have scored 30 points or more versus them this year on DraftKings. But the Texans have allowed 14 different backs to have a rush or a reception of 20 yards or more on the season. That is why I'm going with Pollard, because he's arguably the most explosive back in the league, second in breakaway runs, third in breakaway run rate, second in yards per touch, to go along with third in yards per reception and 6 in yards per route run. He's seen 11 red zone touches in just the last 6 games. So now they're giving him the ball a lot in the red zone, which was the big deal early on with the Zeke Pollard conundrum, if you will. He scored 8 touchdowns in that span, and he's finished top 8 in running back 4 of his last 5 weeks. He's killing it. And he eclipsed 20 points in 4 of his last 5, 30 in 2 of those 5 games. Pollard, if he gets his 15 touches, which he's been getting consistently versus this Texans D, I'd be shocked if he doesn't put up 20 points. I just think he's that talented. The Texans are that bad against the run. And I think he's a bargain at 6,700. I really is. When, again, he's been top 8, 4 out of the last 5 weeks.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, obviously, all of us fantasy fans just wish that they would just even further commit to Tony Pollard over Zeke because he is better. But outside of the red zone, it feels like they've picked it up. That's the reality of the situation. But we'll see. I do really like that play. I was kind of leaning towards that one as well, and I was like, all right, let's throw something else out there. I know I'm not picking Joe Mixon, and I feel like that's the one that's going to haunt me, that he's going to have another 4-touchdown game against Cleveland, who can't defend the run at all. But I've decided to take a page out of your book and go cheap at my high-priced running back, and that's a 6,200 Miles Sanders against my New York Giants. Because, again, all in against the Giants. Last week I did all in against the Giants. It worked out pretty well. So, yeah, let's play it even more with a team that I actually think is good on offense in the Eagles. Sanders, a couple weeks ago against Green Bay, we saw what he can do when things are really going. 140 yards on the ground. He finished with 34 points in that game. He has 2 30-point games on the year, which that's kind of a thing at this point in the season, especially if you've been a starter. I need to know that you can do that. So I love that we've seen that. We've also seen him give us 8 double-digit games. Very solid. And then, I want to fade the Giants. Our run defense seems to be, it was never very good, but it's just fallen apart. We're giving up 119 yards per game on the ground. 3 straight games opposing backfields have gone over 100. Last week, that was Brian Robinson. So, yeah, on over 130 for 3 straight weeks. And one of those games was against the Lions where we gave up 4 rushing touchdowns. So, obviously, the problem with the Eagles is you have to figure out who's going off, because I don't think you want to do like a Sanders-Hurts combination. You're really picking one or the other. But, yeah, if you don't want to spend the money on Hurts and his wide receivers, because the reality is, A.J. Brown's very expensive. Devontae Smith's not cheap. So if you want to fade away from that and just go, hey, I think the Eagles crush him, Miles Sanders goes off, feel free, because, again, you go to things like adjusted line yards, which are really just taking it into account what's happening at the line of scrimmage. And the Giants are really bad. They are 27th. And then actually when you go to pure rushing yards per carry, it's 30th, because we're also bad at tackling downfield. The Eagles are 7th on offense in that stat. This is maybe the best offensive line in the NFL. So, again, just if you're not going with Hurts, if you're going with, like, we love Burrow, we like you loved Goff, I love Goff, we like Geno. Like, there's a lot of options at QB. If you want to go cheaper there, you can hit Sanders, and, again, not that expensive at $6,200.
Yeah, I think this is a week that you go cheaper at QB, cheaper at running back, and you spend like crazy at wide receiver and tight end.
I like that.
My median, again, going cheaper, because you'll see I got some expensive players coming up at wide receiver and tight end. But Dante Foreman, 5,100 at Seattle. Now, make sure he's good to go. He's got a questionable tag. I don't think it's going to be an issue. All the reports say he's expected to play. But, man, he's become a real workhorse in recent weeks. 114 carries his last 6 games. And in games that Carolina's competitive, he's averaging almost 24 carries per. I say that because in the 2 blowout losses, I don't think he had more than 11 carries. And then obviously in the other one, he's averaging right at 24. He's facing a Seattle D that, man, you want to talk about confusing. They started the season as one of the worst defenses versus the pass you've ever seen. Then they had a little stretch for 3-4 weeks where they looked like one of the better defenses in the league. And now they can't stop the run. In their last 5 games, 6 running backs have scored double figures versus this defense, including Josh Jacobs putting up a 50-burger on them. Rachaad White ran so well against this team. He earned the starting job with his performance. And Cam Akers and the Rams, he scored 19 points against this D. I think this is going to be a close game. And I think Foreman's going to get a ton of touches. I don't think they want Sam Darnold flinging it. So I love Dante Foreman at 5,100. He's going to be in almost all my lineups.
I like that one a lot. What do you like, Chuba Hubbard, if Foreman surprisingly is not able to play?
I don't know if I trust him. I would probably pivot to going a little bit more expensive with like a Sanders, and then taking my bargain tier back, or your bargain tier back, who I like as well.
All right, I like that. My mid tier is Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs, 5,700 against the Denver Broncos. 4 straight games, he's seen at least 14 carries, so he has become the clear lead back as far as running the ball goes. Sadly, he has not had a lot of receptions. He had 2 last week, which is the second time he's caught 2 passes in a game this year, so that's not happening a lot. We can't really count on that. But again, he's the clear lead running back in 3 straight games. That's been good enough to get us double-digit points. And the other thing is, yes, this Denver defense is good. Yes, the Broncos would be like 10-3 if they just scored 18 points in every single game. But the key thing here is they're much better against the pass than they are the run, which generally is good because it's better to stop the pass. The problem is if you're losing all the time, as Denver is, it becomes a problem. 4th in pass defense DVOA, 17th against the run. On average, they're giving up 100 yards on the ground to opposing teams. 6 of the last 9 games, the opposing team's gone over 100. That includes 178 for the aforementioned Carolina Panthers with Deontay Foreman. Now, Carolina ran the ball 41 times in that game. Obviously, don't expect Kansas City to do that. But it's also a lot harder to play the run against Kansas City than it is Carolina. So,
just a little bit.
Again,
Mahomes
I think
against Darnold, yeah, I'd say so.
And there's no reason to believe Denver's going to score points because they haven't all year. So I think you can lock him into at least 15 carries. And while Denver hasn't given up a lot of rushing touchdowns, the Kansas City offense is obviously a different animal than literally every other team in the NFL. So if he's getting 15 plus carries, there's a reasonable chance he scores and we're getting 15 to 20 points.
Yeah, he's really become a consistent guy. I think he's underpriced. So I really like that. Before we get in our bargain real quick, Latavius Murray, if you think Denver is going to hang with him in the altitude, good defense, do you like him? Because Kansas City's really struggled against the run. The question is, can they keep it close enough to where Murray can run it a lot?
I almost went with Murray as my my low tier guy, and also he has a reasonable number of receptions on average. I mean, I think he had 4 last week, so
he's double figures. I think in like 3 or 4 straight too.
Yeah, so as long as it's not if it's a complete blowout, then obviously I think that harms him because he's not Austin Eckler. It's not going to be 10 receptions,
right.
But yeah, I think as long as they're within striking distance, he could be a good play this week. My problem was just it was much easier for me to imagine, Pacheco, who's a little more expensive, or the bargain tier guys we have. It was easier for me to imagine those guys getting like multiple touchdowns. Because it's just like, they're just capped because that offense is such a mess that I'm like, I struggle to see like the opportunity for more. Like 1 touchdown seems like the best case. And it's like, all right, we get 15, we'd be happy with that. But I just think the ceiling is so low because of that offense.
Yeah, it scared me away. I pivoted to James Cook, 4,600 versus the Jets for my bargain. I was really high on Cook in the preseason. Yep. Go Dogs. But a fumble on his first carry had other ideas. And it reminds me so much of DeAndre Swift, his rookie year. If you remember, he dropped a touchdown pass that would have won the game for him in the end zone week 1.
Yeah.
He got in the doghouse, kind of like James Cook has. He had to fight his way back.
Well, they are dogs, right? So
that's right. And it's just their nature. Well, and that, I can't say anymore because we won the title last year. So they also just find a way to mess things up. But, it was around this time of year where he really came into his own, took over that backfield. And last week we saw Cook see a 45% snap share, his highest of the season. It was the same as Singletary. He's seen a 23% or higher snap share in 4 of his last 6, double-digit carries in 2 of his last 3. 11 targets in his last 2 games, which is really big. He's becoming the receiving option. And this guy's really, really talented. He's number 1 in the NFL in breakaway run rate this year. 19th in breakaway runs despite being 52nd in carries. So it shows you how often he's breaking away a run despite not a lot of carries. He's 4th in yards per touch. He's 7th in yards per carry. 10th in juke rate. The Bills drafted him for a reason. And what's been most pleasantly surprising for somebody like me who has a lot of James Cook in a lot of leagues is when they made the Nyheim Hines trade, I was like, well, shit, this is over, right? Like I thought they were bringing in Hines because Cook was not going to get a shot this year. It's been the opposite. He's gotten more carries, more opportunities since Hines has came there. Hines is not really even the pass catching back in this offense. And yes, the Jets are a good D. Yes, they're pretty good against the run. 9th overall, but they're 12th in receptions allowed to running backs. They're 2nd in touchdowns allowed in the passing game to running backs. 11th in explosive run rate allowed. So again, that's good for James Cook, who's an explosive running back. And they've given up 21 receptions in their last 4 games. So I think teams are starting to figure out one of the ways to attack this very good Jets defense is to throw to your backs. I think James Cook has at least 4 receptions in this game. I think he scores double-digit points. And I think there is a chance, maybe it's not this week, but in the next few weeks, he's going to have a huge game because he's that explosive a guy. I saw it at Georgia all the time. He did the same thing at Georgia. He never had more than 10, 14 carries. And every once in a while, he'd have 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I like James Cook a lot this week as my bargain tier running back.
Yeah, you've been on him from the get, and yeah, he's had some nice, obviously nothing huge, but when you're in that 4,600 range, we're not asking for a lot to justify that, especially at running back. So I like that. I think that's an interesting one. I'm going with the last man standing in Seattle. That's a Travis Homer 5,000 against the Carolina Panthers. Not a whole lot to sell you on Travis Homer. He has 9 carries on the year. Again, this is the third string running back. In his 4-season career, he has 73 carries. The one thing I do like about it is 5.8 yards per carry. So in his limited opportunities, he has been productive. And he also has 46 receptions. So when you look at that, 46 receptions compared to 73 carries, that tells he actually has more receptions this season at 10 than he has total carries. So he will be involved in the passing game. Seattle's not overly prone to throwing to their running backs because they have 2 very good wide receivers, but he will be out there as much as he can be, assuming he doesn't get hurt. If maybe they're cursed, I don't know. But yeah, at this price range, he should be the clear number 1. Obviously, monitor it, make sure that neither of the guys ahead of him ends up playing, but it seems very unlikely. They have not practiced at all this week. And then we have Carolina, not the worst run defense, but a team that obviously is consistently losing generally, and that's what I expect this week. 4.8 yards per carry allowed, so that's not great. And the huge explosion, again, the Bengals, granted they did pretty well last week, but most of the season, pretty awful running the ball. And then, yeah, Joe Mixon has a 4-touchdown game where, as a team, they broke 200 yards rushing among their backs. So, and actually, 6 straight weeks, they've given up 4.3 yards per carry or more. So it's been a very consistent churning for the run game against Carolina over the last month and a half. So, and actually, I think this is one where you could even play him with Geno because his price is low enough where even if I think maybe most of the production comes from the passing game, this is a buy low opportunity here in a game that could easily end up being like 35-10. So
I like that. Obviously check to see and make sure all the other backs are out, but I think that is a great play, especially if he ends up getting, all the work because they have to give it to him. Yeah. The wide receiver, which again, this is to me where you're going to pound this week and you need to spin. There's some great matchups. Expensive tier, I'm going with Amon-Ra St. Brown, our guy, 7,800 versus Brown, our versus Minnesota. St. Brown, the Sun God, as friend of the pod and guest on last week's show. Joe Pepe called him. I like that. I had not heard that. He's averaging 27.83 points per game in his last 3. He's seen 60 targets over his last 6, so he's starting to get back to what we saw at the end of last year. Caught 7 or more passes in 4 of his last 5. And again, to steal from Joe from last week, St. Brown, in my opinion, under 8K is basically a must start. Like he just is with how much he gets targeted, how consistent he is. And then that's not even considering the fact he's facing the Vikings defense, who I talked about a little bit with Jared Goff. But man, are they struggling with pass catchers. And just the last 3 games, Joseph Matz, 11 receivers, 11 different receivers have a reception of 30 yards or more versus this D. Yikes. The 4 receivers they faced with a similar target share this season that St. Brown gets, Garrett Wilson, Hopkins, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. The 4 of them combined for 44 receptions for 626 yards versus this D. I expect St. Brown to go nuts. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I think that there's potentially 3 to 4 receivers in this game that could score 15 or more points. I expect St. Brown to score 20 or more points. He is a must-start, in my opinion, in every lineup.
I agree with you so much that he is also my high-tier guy. I expect this game to be an absolute shootout. The Vikings do have one corner who's played really well this year, and that's Patrick Peterson, who revival season for him.
Never gets old.
But But obviously, he's not a guy who, at this point in his career, he's not going to go into the slot
right
all game and cover Amon-Ra, which is where he primarily operates from. Vikings giving up the second most fantasy points to wide receivers. Again, I think this is a shootout, and we both agree this is a shootout. We think the Lions win. And if that's going to happen, I would assume we're going to see another big Amon-Ra game. Again, 3 of the last 4 weeks, 25 or more points. And yeah, there's a handful of guys who see the consistent targets he does. So yeah, I see no, like Joe said, like you said, I mean, he finally bumped up because he was 7,100 last week. But yeah, if he should probably, to my mind,
he should be in like that Diggs range, right? Like,
yeah, he should be like 8,400 right now. I don't see why he should be below 8,000. So yeah, I'm going to play him till he is.
All right. I also love my median tier. Christian Kirk, 6,600 versus Tennessee. The Tennessee Titans. Kirk is averaging 20.67 points per game over his last 3. That's 8th best at wide receiver in that span. This is a big thing, though. In his last 6 games, he's seen 55 targets, has 37 receptions. The Titans have allowed 11 receivers to catch a pass of 24 yards or more in just their last 4 games. I always love to bring this up because it arguably was the call of the year. You gave De'Ami Brown earlier this year versus the Titans for $3,000. He had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. In just the last few weeks, the wide receivers who scored the most fantasy points of their opponent, just to kind of show you what you can do against the secondary. This is just the last 3 weeks. A.J. Brown last week, 8 for 119, 2 touchdowns. The week before that, T. Higgins, 7 for 114, a touchdown. The week before that, Christian Watson, 4 for 48, 2 touchdowns. And they've allowed 8 pass catchers in their last 5 games to catch 6 or more passes, a number Kirk has surpassed in 4 of his last 6. I think Kirk has such a high floor this week. I'd be shocked if he doesn't catch at least 6 passes. I think it's going to be closer to 10. The question is, can he, Kirk's not really a super explosive guy, but if he can have a big play, which the Titans love to give him up, I think Kirk could easily have, again, 20 plus points. And now we've got a 7,800 receiver with a 66, which is not outrageous, with 2 guys that I think have a great chance to score 20 points or more.
Yeah, I could never argue any wide receiver play against the Tennessee Titans. It's the only question every week is which guy goes off, or which guys, honestly, I think is very reasonable. I wouldn't hate playing Trevor Lawrence this week because
I should have gave the caveat, make sure Lawrence is going to play. If Lawrence is out, pivot from this play completely. I meant to mention that, but it looks like he's going to play, and then I'm all in on Kirk.
Yeah, the guy I'm going with for my mid-tier is Tyler Lockett.
Respect the guy, right? Like, what the hell, man? What does he have to do?
Yeah, to that point, there are 6 guys in this normal Sunday slate that we're talking about who are averaging more fantasy points on DraftKings than Tyler Lockett. All of them cost at least $1,000 more.
It's ridiculous.
Like, again, his own teammate, DK Metcalf, he's averaging 1.5 more points. Metcalf is 600 more.
Not nearly as consistent, though. Like, the thing about Lockett I love is every week, man. Every week, it's like 15 points or more.
Yeah, I mean, Amari Cooper, who is a tough matchup and is close, he's only 300 less. I think that should be a lot more. I think Tyler Lockett should be a $7,000 guy. Yeah, we've seen, let me count it up because I didn't before, 6 straight weeks he has broken 10 points, and it's actually 10 of the last 11. They struggled against Denver week 1. Again, great pass defense. And then we have the infamous Arizona game where I went all in on Seattle, and they scored 19 points. But every other game, 10 points. You can slot him in for a minimum of 5 targets. Normally it's more. Last week we got 12, 9 receptions, 128 yards, touchdown against the Rams. He's actually scored a touchdown in 5 straight games. So yeah, Tyler Lockett has been Mr. Consistency. I mean, we had a 30-point game last week. He had a 30-point game against New Orleans. And so, yeah, the ceiling is there. The floor is as high as anyone you're going to get, honestly, like under 7,500. And then Carolina, J.C. Horn, pretty good corner. Otherwise, it's a disaster. Whoever is not being covered by Horn is going to be open on most plays. And
But don't you think they're going to put him on Metcalf as much as they can?
My expectation would be he would play more on Metcalf, especially, again, Lockett's going to be the guy who bounces in and out of the slot more often. Yeah, and Geno Smith, again, playing at a really high level, he will find Tyler Lockett when he is open. So, yeah. And again, I forgot the PFF, my old trusty wide receiver corner advantage.
What's his matchup? Give it to me, Joe.
99.9.
Yeah. Is that the highest this week?
That is the highest. The second highest was Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah.
So, yeah, with all in on those guys.
Love it. Lockett. I'm serious. The disrespect is crazy. The other guy who I mentioned in my flex, Garrett Wilson's the other guy, but I don't get it with the pricing. All right, my bargain, DJ Shark, 4,300 versus Minnesota. In Shark's 5 games played this year, where he's played 70% of the snaps or more. He's seen an average of just under 6 targets per a game, has scored 7.6 points or more in 4 or 5. And in both games with an 80% or higher snap share, he scored 14.8 and 15.2 points. He's facing that awful Vikings secondary I spoke about earlier. There is a small chance that Jameson Williams, this is his breakout game, and I'll acknowledge that. Maybe he, plays more snaps. Obviously, he's explosive. Goff's talked about like his amazing speed and ability. Maybe he takes some of those targets from Shark, but after what I saw last week, I don't think it's going to be significant. I think they give him a bump, but not a lot. I mean, he only ran 2 routes last week. So if Shark runs 30 plus routes and plays 80% of the snaps, I think his floor is 7 to 10 points and his ceiling is in the 20-point range. And at 4,300, man, I love that. And this is a talented guy. I mean, Shark is somebody who consistently has put up points. It's just when he's healthy. That's been the issue for the last 3 years is when Shark's healthy, he scores points. Obviously, when he's not healthy, he doesn't. But I do like DJ Shark at 4,300. And I actually like the double stack of going with Goff, Brown, and Shark. Crazy, too. Shark is actually $100 cheaper than Williams. A guy that ran 2 routes last week.
You're right. Played more in special teams than he did on offense.
Is more expensive than DJ Shark.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Yeah, for my own sake, I have Jameson Williams in one of my keeper leagues. I would love for him to go off, but we have time for that to happen later. So I'm
okay with him going off. I just don't think it's going to be this week. I think.
I don't think it will be either. And again, yeah, we're very much in on this Vikings-Lions game being a shootout. I like that play a lot. I'm going Zay Jones, who is another guy who's slow. This is a guy I thought was trash coming into the year. Now I think
we're just picking on the Titans and the Vikings and the Texans. I love it.
We are indeed. Last week, obviously, yeah. Hey, if it works, we're not going to stop. Last week was a disaster. I think I actually might have even picked Zay Jones. I don't remember, but the Lions shut down the Jags 40-14. So really an off game all around for the Jags. 2 weeks prior, though, Zay Jones, back-to-back double-digit targets. He had 213 yards and 19 receptions combined in weeks 10 and 12. They had their bye in week 11. So over 45 points across those 2 weeks. So again, another guy, we've had multiple 20-plus point games from him, so we know he can go off for us. He can give us the points we need. He's not just a guy where it's like, hey, if we get 10 at 4,700, we're fine with it. But he's a guy who has that ceiling to get you 20-plus points. And, yeah, against these Tennessee Titans, there's a reasonable – like we said, I think at least one of these Jags receivers is going off, and it could be multiple. Again, going by DVOA, so this is accounting for touchdowns allowed, yards per target, all of that stuff. Titans 29th in DVOA against number 2 wide receivers.
Ooh.
Now, of course, they're outside the top 20 against number 1 receivers and all other receivers because they are truly that bad. But yeah, again, at this price point, 4,700.
Again, De'Ami Brown, right? Like that was the game Dotson was out and he was the number 2 receiver.
Exactly. Zay Jones has run at least one deep route, I believe, like 4 straight weeks. Like we saw with De'Ami Brown, you just need one of those and it can hit. If you run 2 of them, they might both hit as well. So I really like that. And again, the pairing with, if you do the Lawrence pairing with either of those guys, it's a really affordable. I mean, Zay Jones is crazy cheap, and even there's no losing here against the Titans. So
I love it. Like I said, a lot of our success this year has been picking on some of these bad defenses over and over and over again. Moving on to tight end, again, arguably my favorite play this week. Mark Andrews, 6,500 at Pittsburgh. In the 5 games Andrews played with Huntley last year, and you guys are welcome. I went back and did this math. He saw 56 targets, 7 red zone targets, caught 43 passes, 498 yards, and 4 scores. That was 36% of his targets on the year, 44% of his touchdowns, 40% of his receptions, and 36% of his receiving yards in 5 games. It's a 17-game season now. So that is less than a third of the season. And he put up well over a third in all those categories. He's my favorite play this week. I love stacking him with a cheap QB and Huntley, who has a high floor because of his running ability. The Steelers on paper are good versus tight ends, but that is just schedule. And it's why we talk about on this podcast a lot. Look at the numbers, like actually dig into them. Don't just glance at the numbers, look at them, see who they played. Because when facing decent to better tight ends, the numbers are not great. Dallas Goedert, 6 receptions, 64 yards. Juwan Johnson, 5 receptions, 44 yards and a touchdown. Hayden Hurst in 2 games, 7 receptions, 72 yards. Tyler Conklin, 3 receptions, 52 yards. David Njoku, 9 receptions, 82 yards and a touchdown. Andrews is more talented than all of those guys. Huntley is going to pelt him with targets. Again, in 5 games last year, he saw 56 targets. I think Huntley likes going to Andrews. I love Andrews. Andrews is going to be in every lineup. Like whether I stack him with Huntley or just by himself, I think 6,500 with the history, because 5 games is not a tiny sample size.
That's decent.
It's not nothing. And I mean, even last week, I think he saw 6 of his 7 targets once Huntley came in the game. I love Mark Andrews, 6,500 at Pittsburgh. He's my expensive tier tight end.
Yeah, can't argue with that. If you're going Huntley, you absolutely have to go Andrews. And I'll be doing that at least one of my lineups, doing that combination. Coming off of I picked A.J. Brown last week. That obviously went very well. So I'm going to ride the revenge game theory. And TJ Hawkinson against the Detroit Lions. Granted, I don't know that he really, outside of having to play for them,
he was thankful that they traded
revenge. Right. Like this was not the same thing where I guess they decided not to pay him, is he on a second contract? I'm not even sure. But yeah, they did him a favor really, because now he's on a 10-win team. But yeah, I just think TJ Hawkinson, very good. Since coming to the Vikings, which now I believe also is a 5-game sample size, at least 6 targets every single game. Kirk Cousins is looking for him. He's broke 10 points, 3 of those 5. Still 7 and 8 points in the others. So this isn't, he's not totally shitting the bed in any week, again, because he's getting those consistent targets. When we look at the Lions against tight ends, last 3 weeks only allowed 53 yards. But like you just said, always pay attention to who they're playing. They're playing the Giants, who are starting like practice team squad guys ever since Daniel Bellinger got hurt. We had 0 receptions on 0 targets. Dawson Knox is an afterthought in the Bills offense. And then Evan Ingram, the Jags, only 33 yards, but a touchdown. Yep. And actually, when you go further back, the previous 6 games before that 3-game stretch, 6 touchdowns allowed to tight ends. So this is not a great defense by any stretch of the imagination. And do keep in mind that week 3, when these teams faced each other, Detroit actually did a good job limiting Justin Jefferson. And then everyone else and their offense had a good game.
Yep.
So, I mean, who knows if that plays out exactly the same. Justin Jefferson's very good. But assuming the Lions will try that again, and my assumption is they will, that leaves a lot of room for other guys to eat if the focus is all on Jefferson, which is exactly why Minnesota got TJ Hawkinson. So I think it pays off this week for both them and us.
Don't you think Hawkinson's due for a huge game too with the Vikings? Like he hadn't had that yet. I'm expecting
he's had,
before the season to have like a 20-plus point game. Yeah.
Because, his first game there against Washington, he's 9 receptions, 70 yards, but he doesn't catch a touchdown.
Yep.
Catch that touchdown, now we're in a 20-point game, and
this is as good of a week as any. I love that. My median, George Kittle's 4,300 versus Tampa. I'll go ahead and tell you, this is purely just matchup and a guy with a lot of talent at a cheap price. Kittle's has scored double figures in 4 of his last 7, but only once in his last 4 games. That's the other thing. I think he's going to be low owned. The other 3, he never scored more than 5.6 points, so that's not good. But the Bucs are 30th on DK in points allowed to tight ends. They've allowed 4 more receptions to tight ends in 8 games this season. They've given up a touchdown to a tight end in 4 of their last 6. They even allowed Taysom Hill to catch a receiving touchdown last week, a guy who has 19 receptions over the last 3 seasons, and he caught a touchdown pass versus his defense. Finally, I know Brock Purdy peppered his receivers last week, 19 targets to Samuel and Ayuk, another 10 to CMC, while Kittle only saw 3. But I just have a feeling Shanahan is going to want to exploit a real weakness in the Bucs defense. And normally tight ends are young, inexperienced quarterbacks, best friends. I just think he's too low priced. He's going to be low owned, and there's a chance he could, Kittle's is a talented dude. He could go off. I like him in that median range at this price.
I mean, he's tempting every week when he's down at this 4,300 range, because obviously
it's kind of like the Kyle Pitts dilemma, right? Like you got a guy,
right? The consistency hasn't been there, but I mean, everyone knows this is a top 5 tight end in the NFL, and I mean overall and just receiving wise. So I think it's interesting to see how this offense looks now with Purdy there. I'm going Greg Dulcich all the way down at 3,400 for my mid-tier.
Love this play.
Again, a guy who started off shockingly hot, because, again, tight ends usually take a while. He missed the first month of the season, comes out 3 straight 10-point games, then 3 straight weeks where he doesn't top 30 yards. Last week was the bounce back against Baltimore, 6 receptions on 8 targets, 85 yards. One of the keys here is Courtland Sutton is out. They're playing Kansas City. They're going to be losing this game, probably for the entire game. They will have to pass. And it's Jerry Jeudy and it's Greg Dulcich. Those are the guys that Russell Wilson's going to be looking towards. So to me, at 3,400, I'm going to be throwing him in a lot of lineups. For, again, a guy whose ADOT is 12.1. That is the second highest among tight ends. He has 11 deep targets. That is second in the NFL. And again, didn't play until week 6. So this is the rare tight end who really is the threat up the seam. And they're going to have to throw some of those if they want to have any chance to keep up with Kansas City. So at 3,400, he's probably if I have the money, obviously I'm going with Mark Andrews. But if I need to save money at tight end, Greg Dulcich is the guy I'm hitting hard this week.
They're lining him up at wide receiver too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're literally lining up at wide receiver.
In part because they don't have, receivers are hurt. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just even more targets and receptions and everything. And it also speaks to his talent. All right. The bargain tier. Jorge, earmuffs. Let me try to pronounce this. Chig Okonkwo, 2,700.
I have no idea if that's right or wrong. Normally I know.
Well, I know it's close because Okongwu is my guy for the Hawks. So it's got to be Okongwu.
That's true. So I would assume it's close.
Last week, he saw a season high 71% snap share, lined up in line 14 times, slot 11, wide receiver 5, even in the backfield twice. So they're moving him all over the place, which is always good for an offensive weapon. He ran 20 routes, a season high on 31 dropbacks by Tannenhill. 5 targets, so he had a 19% target share, turned it into 4 receptions, 68 yards. After only seeing 10 targets, weeks 7 through 11. Now, granted, part of that was the mess that was Malik Willis at QB, but still, he's seen 10 targets in his last 2 games. He scored 5 or more points in 3 of his last 5, and in the fucking mess that tight end is this year, we'll take 5 points and move on most weeks. He's a very talented
at this price
guy.
range, definitely.
Right, yeah. He's a very talented guy. Ran a sub 4.640 at the combine. Is going to be called on to help just a pitiful receiving core. Obviously, Bobby Trees has not worked out. Burks is still not practicing off of the concussion last week. I think if he misses, this guy's going to be in a lot of lineups for me because, I mean, who the hell are they going to throw it to? And the Jags, they're 21st versus tight ends, but in their last 5 games, they've allowed 24 receptions for 381 yards and 3 touchdowns to the tight ends. Chig Okonkwo, 2,700 is my bargain tier tight end.
Yeah, I'm co-signing this one. Again, the Jaguars, this is according to CBS Sports, 58.8 yards allowed per game to tight ends on 6.3 targets. So that means over 9 yards a target to tight ends, which is absurd, especially considering most tight ends aren't running super long routes. And then Dulcich, got to move on Konkwu. This is a small sample size. He's only run 77 routes on the season. His target rate, though, is 32.5%. So on those 77, he has 25 targets. So basically 1 out of every 3 routes, he has seen the ball so far this season. So clearly when he's out there, they view him as a weapon. And as you just mentioned, a weapon that they definitely need on this offense in this passing game. So, yeah, I mean, when you have a guy who's going to start and could very, like you said, if he gets 5 points at 2,700, all right, cool. If he catches a touchdown, he doesn't have to do anything else the rest of the – he catch a 1-yard touchdown, and I'd be like, sweet, nailed it. Like, the floor is that low at this price range. But he definitely has that ability to even give us a 10-plus point game, I think, against this defense. So, yeah, I really like him as well.
All right, moving on to the flex. I know we talked about how bad of a game he had. I know he's super expensive, but I'm going with Justin Jefferson, 9K. I know there's not really an explanation needed for a guy that averages 23.7 points per game. He scored 40 or more points in 4 of his last 9, 5 times overall on the season. But I just expect Jefferson to go bananas in this matchup. In the first matchup, he only caught 3 passes for 18 yards on 6 targets. He ain't happy about that. I can guarantee you. Jeff Okudah, who has played really well this year, best ball of his career. He's a corner that will shadow. He's been missing practices with an illness. So I don't know if he's going to go. It doesn't sound like he's going to be 100%. But regardless, the Lions are still 28th versus wide receivers on DraftKings. I expect this to be a shootout. And you talked about last time they tried to take everybody else away. Or excuse me, they tried to take Jefferson away and everybody else went ham. Well, they lost that game. They may try to flip it this time where they're like, we'll let Jefferson eat and we're going to try to take away everybody else. I don't see Jefferson having 2 duds versus the Detroit Lions. It's not impossible. It's just not possible. It's the Detroit freaking Lions. It's Justin Jefferson. He's going to go crazy. He's my expensive tier at 9,000. And I've given so many cheap plays today. You can definitely fit him in. I've already done a bunch of lineups. I've got him in most of them.
That's true. That's a good point. I'm also going pretty expensive and at wide receiver with my high tier flex, and that's Jamar Chase, 7,900 against the Cleveland Browns. Looked at
so
ease coming
back.
Yeah, exactly. Comes back, catches 7 of his 8 targets, 97 yards. We're just missing the 3 yards to get that bonus in the touchdown last week. On the season, he has played 8 games. He has broken 10 points in all 8 games. He has had at least 6 targets in all 8 games. He's really good. Before the injury, he was coming off back-to-back 35-point games. So we've been waiting kind of all year for that explosion. I think I picked him against your Atlanta Falcons. Yeah, he was a guy. We knew the explosion was coming. It happened. Again, we know the floor is there because he never goes under 10. Joe Burrow is playing at as good a level he's ever played at. Cleveland Browns, not a great pass defense. Obviously, they're even worse against the run, which is why, again, I'm worried that Joe Mixon's going to haunt me because I almost picked him the week he had the 4 touchdowns. I didn't, so maybe that happens again. But
don't worry about it. Joe Mixon has done nothing other than that 1 week.
Yeah. And then Denzel Ward, who previously was like an elite cornerback for the Browns, he is 96th in coverage grade on PFF this year. I don't know what's going on with him, but he's been a disaster. Again, I think the big question for me is, does this turn out to be a T. Higgins game? As always, that's the worry with the Bengals. But I just think another explosion is coming. That's what I think is going to happen this week. I think Joe Burrow really wants to finally beat the Browns because it's absurd that he has not beaten the Browns yet. He's beaten Kansas City 3 times and he hasn't beaten the Browns. So yeah, I think they light this Browns team up.
And he's played the Browns. This will be the 6th time.
Yeah, it's absurd. And even the game he missed his rookie year because he was hurt, they lost that game. I mean, it's not a surprise.
It's 5 times. You're
Joe
right.
Burrow didn't play, but yeah, like he's due, more than due, especially because this Browns team, we saw him last week. They did not look great, but honestly, probably better for Burrow and Chase actually if Deshaun Watson does shake off his rust this week. But either way, I think the Bengals are hanging 30 plus on the Browns. So pick your Bengal, throw them in a lineup.
Yeah, they smell blood in the water with the Ravens. That's why I think the Bengals are going to eat the rest of the way. I really do. I thought the division was over, and now they got a legit chance to win it. So I talked about Dante Foreman. I talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown. I talked about Mark Andrews. That's 3 of the 4 core for me this week. The 4th is Garrett Wilson, 5,900 at Buffalo. He scored 17.9 points or more in 4 of his last 5. He's averaging 19 points a game in that span. The big thing here is Mike White is at QB. Zach Wilson is not. Garrett is now averaging 21.56 points per game in games not started by Zach Wilson. That's the 2 starts by Mike White and the 3 by Joe Flacco. And in the 2 with White as the QB, 26.4, 27.2 points. He's already played Buffalo this season. In that game with Zach Wilson, Garrett Wilson caught 8 passes for 92 yards on 9 targets. The Bills are without their best pass rusher for the rest of the season, Von Miller. And, man, the Bills have all of a sudden, their team you can throw on. They struggle with number 1 receivers. In the last 4 matchups. It's been a surprise,
yeah.
Versus teams willing to throw. I don't count the Pats game last week because they don't throw the ball down the field. So the week before that, St. Brown, 9 receptions, 122 yards, a touchdown. The week before that, Amari Cooper, 8 receptions, 113 yards, 2 touchdowns. The week before that, Justin Jefferson, 10 receptions, 193 yards, a touchdown. The week before that, Garrett Wilson, 8 receptions, 92 yards. That's 37 receptions for 520 yards and 4 scores to number 1 receivers if you take away the New England Patriots in their last 4 games. And Garrett Wilson gets them again. I love Wilson. I love how much White is looking at him. Like, his targets are ridiculous right now. And it's extremely disrespectful that he's still under 6K. It's crazy. He's going to be in every lineup. Like, he's too cheap. He's too good. And the Bills are not the matchup everybody thinks they are against number 1 receivers.
Yeah, I 100% agree. If you had not picked him, he would have been one of my mid-tier guys. I love that play as well. But since you did, I wanted to shine a light on another guy, and that's Deebo Samuel at 6,100 against the Tampa Bay Bucks. Now, obviously, there's some risk. We've only seen essentially 1 game of the Brock Purdy San Francisco 49ers. Although, according to him, according to all the teammates there, he's basically Peyton Manning, apparently. So,
Big Cock Brock is what we're hearing now. You had Big Dick Nick, now you got Big Cock Brock.
But I actually think this might be good for Deebo Samuel. He started off the year really strong, 6 straight games, double-digit points. Then it's kind of been up and down the last month or so. He had a big game against Arizona, But the other 3 games, Kansas City, Chargers, New Orleans, kind of lackluster. 10 targets last week, obviously mostly with Brock Purdy. That is only the second game this year where he's seen 10 targets. So we know Purdy is looking for him. One thing I do like is after he had a 4-week span where he only had 9 carries, he's seen double-digit carries in 4 straight games. My expectation is with Brock Purdy, Deebo Samuel's carries go up.
Yeah.
And I also just think you want to get the ball out quick and easy. That's why Purdy's targeting him over a guy like Brandon Ayuk. On the season, Deebo Samuel is 12th in target rate, 100th in average target distance. So they throw to him a lot. His average distance when it's thrown to him is 4.5 yards. Not surprisingly, 2nd yards after the catch.
It's kind of always been his thing, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has been.
Last year it changed a little bit, but before that, we talked about it all the time that they didn't throw it far to him.
Right. I mean, I think Trey Lance was the reason we were kind of like, ooh, is Ayuk the sleeper player this year because he's going to throw downfield more, and then that goes out the window very early on. But yeah, I think this is even more so. Now it's like, all right, we want it as easy as possible for Purdy. That just means more Deebo Samuel. And I think that goes extra for this game against Tampa Bay because we know Todd Bowles likes to bring pressure.
Yep.
They are 3rd in sack rate in the NFL. So you want the ball out quick. You want it in your playmakers' hands. This feels like a Deebo Samuel game to me.
Did we mess up not including CMC then in our plays? Because that also sounds like to me another game where he had 10 targets last week, 8 receptions.
It could be.
Is another week where he has like an Eckler type performance in the receiving game?
I mean, I think the hard thing for me is just that Tampa Bay is a good defense, and you got to pay $8,500.
That's true.
Because it definitely could be. Like if he, again, like you said, he just scored 28. Granted, I don't think the Miami defense is awesome, but
no, they're not.
But yeah, I mean, could he score 25 plus? Absolutely. He's Christian McCaffrey. And yeah, everything I just said about Deebo Samuel could apply to Christian McCaffrey, but at $2,400 more dollars,
that's true.
It's just not really where I want to go.
I like that. All right, bargain tier. I'm going to your boys. Richie James Jr., 3,600 versus Philly. Guys, I'm not crazy. This is all about a guy who plays in the slot a lot versus a defense that really struggles with slot receivers. In a game that, again, earmuffs Joe, I expect the Giants to be behind and throwing often. In the 3 games, James has played 70% or more snaps. He's averaging just over 11 points per game. With Wan'Dale Robinson out for the season, and again, in a game that I expect the Giants to be down, I expect him to play around 50 to 75% of the snaps. In his last 3 games, he scored 13.8 points or more in 2 of 3. The Eagles have given up 17 touchdowns on the season to slot receivers. They've only given up 28 total passing touchdowns. We talked about it with Paris Campbell and a lot of other guys. This is where you can attack this defense. And if the Giants get down and they have to throw a lot, I could easily see Richie James having a 5-6 reception game. He catches a touchdown at 3,600. Man, that is a boom play.
I mean, I definitely hope that part of your prediction turns out to be true. But as I said, as I picked, Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, I expect you to be right about everything you just said. So yeah, I hope we at least put up a fight and we get a Richie James.
I think they will. The crowd's going to be lit. That's what I told Alan on, when we did the gambling pod, that I think y'all are in it overall just because that crowd is going to be worth at least, I think 5-6 points. They're going to be insane.
I hope so. I would be fine with a spirited loss to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Get you ready for the Washington game next week.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one that really matters. I'm going very low. KJ Osborne down at 3,500 against the Detroit Lions. This one is pretty simple. KJ Osborne is not remotely a consistent fantasy performer. He has 4 games this season over 7 points. There's a reason that he is 3,500. But what we like a lot about this matchup is Detroit has allowed the 3rd most points to the slot, which is where KJ Osborne primarily lines up. if we look through his season 2, he's had 2 games where he's seen more than 5 targets. One was the Buffalo game, which was just a wild shootout that went into overtime. The other was against the Detroit Lions, where he caught 5 of 8 passes, 73 yards, and a touchdown. 18.3 points is his best game of the season. Again, the focus is going to be on Jefferson. After that, you still got Thielen and Hawkinson. Now, the risk here is obviously, hey, well, yeah, and stopping Cook in the run game. The risk here is obviously if you have a lot of weapons, the 4th, 5th guy down the line, maybe he doesn't see the ball. But at the same time, again, we're attacking one of the biggest weakness in this Detroit defense is covering the slot. We think the focus will be primarily Jefferson, and then it's everyone else. Osborne will be on the field if we are right that this game is a shootout. So, yeah, I think he's worth that roll of the dice. Now, I wouldn't put him in all of my lineups, but I would throw him in 1 or 2 lineups and just be like, hey, there's a chance he's getting us 15 points at 3,500, and then we're spending a bunch of money to go get the Jamar Chases of the world.
Again, though, at 3,500,
even do the combo with Justin
points,
Jefferson.
We're happy, right? Like 7 points, and we're happy. He doubled it. If he triples it, that's what you're really looking for at every cost.
And I think you want multiple guys from this game. Like, you save money here, you then go spend that money to get Amon-Ra St. Brown, who we are head over heels for this week. So that's where my mind is at with KJ Osborne.
No, I like that. And that's one thing I feel like we haven't done a great job of this year, and I'm glad that we're doing it, is the cheap plays are going to be slot receivers versus bad defenses against the slot. That's what we need to be looking for. We haven't done a great job of that. That's the one thing I will say that we could work on.
Hey, don't forget Paris Campbell. We
did, but he was a little bit more. I'm talking about like cheap. Well, I guess he was.
That's true.
The first week, he was 3,700 that we. Yeah. So you're right. We have
Raiders slot receivers. I have no idea how this Rams game is going. I haven't looked, and the Rams aren't.
Well, Baker Mayfield's playing, so you got that going for you. So, all right, defenses. Wow. Again, I never spend on defenses, but I can't not take the Cowboys 3,800 at Houston.
Yes.
They're averaging 13 points a game over the last 3. They've scored double figures in 4 of 6, 7 games overall. And then the big thing is Dallas has won 3 of their last 5 games by 20 points or more. So they are not afraid to really put the foot on the throat. They don't seem to take the foot off the gas in these games. Like, they're okay just destroying people. And man, the poor Texans we saw last week. I'm not thinking that they're going to have 3 with the special teams. It was 3 touchdowns, but the Cowboys at 3,800, they feel like a steal. Again, they're averaging 13 points a game their last 3, and they've scored double digits in 7 of their 12 games. I think 3,800 is a really cheap price for a defense that good and a great matchup. My median is Pittsburgh 2,800, multiple sacks in 5 of 6. The Ravens offense has struggled at times this season. We know how high I am on Huntley and Andrews, but there is a chance this could go the other way. And I'm trying to look for these, the cheap defense. I really liked what Joe said last week. And I'm going to start doing that. I'm starting it this week with just taking one of the 3 cheapest defenses and going, okay, which one of those has a chance to go off? I'm going with Carolina 2,200 at Seattle. They've scored 9 or more points in 3 straight, 8 or more, 7 of 10. Multiple sacks in 5 straight. So I could see a script where they end up winning this game, right? And especially if they get pressure on Geno, Seattle, down to their 3rd string running back. And, there's a chance. But I'm going to try to get Dallas in most of them. This is going to be one of those weeks that I'm going to try to find a 3,800. As long as it doesn't sacrifice the rest of my lineup. But I'm going to try to find that 3,800 and have Dallas because they're just that good. What defenses you got, Joe?
We agree on 2 of the 3. I think it's insane to me that Dallas is not the most expensive defense. That makes no sense at all. Like, I know Mike White is, a roller coaster and he might throw 3 picks against the Bills, but I mean, this Dallas defense is playing as good as any defense in the NFL. I mean, you listed the numbers that they've done fantasy wise. I mean, 11.4 points per game on DK. That's 1.6 more than anyone else on the Sunday slate. And they're playing the worst offense in the NFL. I mean, I know Denver's awful, but they haven't turned it over multiple times in 5 straight games. So I'm going to say Houston's worse. Yeah, I can't fathom paying for the Bills or Kansas City than the Cowboys are less. That makes no sense. This happens like once or twice a month where I just look and I'm like,
Kansas City on the road in Denver. I don't want any part of that game. Like, I really don't.
Right.
You know, it's like Pacheco's probably the one guy that I agree with you with. But other than that, like, that game scares me. Denver at home is still a tough place to play.
Right. And like, hey, it's great if you don't give up a lot of points, but where the really big games come from defenses, which you want if you're spending the money, are the turnovers and the sacks, and that's coming in this game.
Right. Yeah.
If they don't get 3 sacks and 2 turnovers, I will be shocked. And that's on the low end. There's a couple of interesting mid-tier ones. I think you could, argue San Francisco against Tampa Bay because Tampa Bay's offense has been funky. San Francisco can really pressure the passer.
What was San Francisco's price?
3,200. I couldn't quite go with it, though, just because Tom Brady doesn't take a lot of sacks. He doesn't throw a lot of picks. So, again, I think you have a reasonable floor there because I don't think you're going to, get negative points. You're going to get at least 4 or 5 points in this game. But that big game is probably not coming against Brady. Likewise, I think you could do Bucks against San Francisco if you don't believe the Purdy hype. But I'm with you. I think it's the Steelers game at 2,800. Just because, again, we both like Huntley, but hey, he did play the Steelers team last year. Yes, it was a better defense, but still, he had a 2-interception game, no touchdowns. So that could happen again. It wouldn't be the craziest thing. There is a reason why Tyler Huntley's our low-tier guy. Going down, I couldn't go much cheaper. I like the reasoning of the Carolina one because I think all those other defenses, I mean, I guess you could talk yourself into Denver being elite, but I'm not ever taking a defense against Kansas City. So I like the reasoning, but again, I took a bunch of Seattle players, so I very much believe Seattle will
I got that. Yeah.
So I'm going with the Jets at 2,500 against Buffalo. This burned me last week. This was my favorite play last week. I was hoping for the Kirk Cousins meltdown. Didn't happen. They only scored 2 points.
It's 2 weeks in a row we've been waiting for the Kirk Cousins meltdown. He did it in the New England game, too.
It's got to come, man. It's got to come. But 8 straight weeks before that, they'd scored at least 7 points. That included a previous matchup against Buffalo where they scored 10 points and they only gave up 17 in reality. They had 5 sacks on Josh Allen in that game. This is a good defense. The Bills' offense is, very good, but it's not indestructible, as the Jets have proven. So if I'm really trying to save money, I'll go down the Jets. But I'm kind of with you. If I can save the money this week, maybe Dallas is actually worth it because I really think it's that great of a matchup, and I don't understand why it's not 4,000 or more.
So the one defense that I was really close to picking, but they're just it's kind of expensive, is Detroit. I like them versus Minnesota. Their defense has played good lately. They have multiple sacks and 6 out of the last 7. They've created at least 1 turnover in their last 10 games. Wow, looking at 10 straight games, 5 points or more in 5 straight, but 3,000 is high. You know what I mean? Like, to me, that's too much.
Yeah, if they were down in that Jets range, then maybe I'm going Lions instead because, they have been playing a lot better, and we are overdue for the Kirk Cousins meltdown. But, 3,000, I couldn't justify spending more on the Lions defense than Tampa Bay against Brock Purdy or the Steelers against the remnants of the Ravens offense.
No, I'm with you. All right, Joe. We got through week 14. Hopefully it's going to be a banger. Another 200-point optimal lineup. Let's go back to we broke 240 twice this year. Let's get back in that range.
Let's do that. If we hit the receivers again like we did last week, I think we can do it because I think we're going to get
because we did
more productive plays elsewhere.
The running backs for sure and tight ends. Shit, we had in our optimal lineup. I think what was it? Our defense 4 points. Yikes!
Oh my god, I didn't realize it was
it was rough. Anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Off the top of my head, I just check out all of the Fantasy and Frame stuff. I know I was looking through some of it today. I was trying to find some updated Dynasty rankings because I'm way out of it, the playoff contention in one of my leagues, and because we're a keeper league, our trade deadline passes tonight. So I'm like, hey, I gotta make some trades so I can have good keepers next year because I whiffed on this season in that league.
All right. Well, be sure to definitely check out fantasyandframes.com, the Fantasy and Frames Podcast Network, the Sunday Morning Show, which is live on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. I'm going to try to get back on there this week. I've missed the last couple of weeks. And then next week, Joe, we had the Live from Vegas show earlier, live from D.C., KC and DC. Yeah, man. Going to the White House, the Capitol, and doing a tour of the Civil Rights Museum. So I'm jacked, man. I really am, but we'll have to figure that out. But I will be in DC, probably in a hotel room. But I am looking forward to it, and we'll definitely come on. We'll be providing content. And again, just a reminder, we are going through the end of the year. So
all the way.
About the season's over. No. We're just getting started. And the fun thing is the playoffs. Me and Joe talk about this. I love the wild card and divisional weekends because it's just enough games to where there's a lot of possibilities, but not so many to where if you can really hammer the plays. I had a fantastic wild card weekend last year, and then we had a really good Super Bowl too. But
our first show on Fantasy and Frames was
that's
a Super
right.
Bowl show.
So we're getting ready for 1 year.
People should know, hopefully, that we do go all the way.
That's right. All right. So for Joseph the Brain Matz, Keith Fleming, this is week 14 of the Daily Fix podcast on the Fantasy and Frames Podcast Network, and we will see you guys soon. Psych, that was the wrong song to exit. But let's get
I was like, this is different. All right.
we changed it up. All right. So let's try that again.